Hello and welcome to Newsnight. I am Ladi Akiridoluale. It's our pleasure to have you join us today. The federal government says it will be spending $1.5 billion, that's the equivalent of about $500 billion naira, on the rehabilitation of the Port Harcourt Refinery in Rivers State to bring it back to production of at least 90% of its plate capacity. This is against the backdrop of a clamor for the resumption of local refining of petroleum products in country. While this might be said to have obvious benefits, questions arise as to why more money should be spent on this when what had previously been expended did not produce tangible or sustainable results. What will be different this time around, and how will this process unfold? There's also the continuously contentious issue of appropriate and market-driven pricing of petrol. What are the facts and plans here? Newsnight talks to the Group Managing Director of the Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation, the NNPC, Malam Mele Kyari. GMD, thank you for your time. Welcome to the program.
Thank you very much.
Let's begin from now and then maybe walk our way back a little. After a very long break, the queues returned, particularly in Abuja, for fuel. And already people put it down to the whole issue of whether we've deregulated the downstream sector or not. Marketers saying landing costs have gone up, but that the price remains the same, therefore they cannot import or they cannot sell at the price that they are mandated to sell. What exactly happened?
Yes, we're actually not surprised that this happened because there is a long conversation around full implementation of the deregulation policy. As you're aware, there's no provision for subsidy in the 2020 appropriation, and it means that the PMS market is completely deregulated. But we're also aware of the social issues around it. About September last year, when the market switched to a situation where the prices are now beyond 145 naira to the liter at the pump, there were engagements with organized labor and other stakeholders to the effect that we have seen this coming. And of course, it threw up a challenge about how to do best without exploiting the ordinary people in the pricing system. So that conversation led to the deferment of the implementation of the full deregulation of the price. So we couldn't implement it even as the prices were galloping above the 145. And of course, we are selling below our cost. And that conversation is supposed to end by the end of February. And the overall customer bracket are aware that this is going to happen. The engagements were going on, and they expected that by the 28th of February, government or NNPC, not government really, NNPC will declare a new pricing at the depots, and therefore literally moving from a sub-market pricing to a new market situation. And the delta is significant because when we moved that price to 162 around September, end of September, and the first week of November, it is obvious today that the market price is beyond that number, anywhere above 40 naira, on top of what we know in that time. So the marketers know that if we switch that price, it is an obvious commercial advantage. That it simply means that instead of selling something at 162 naira, you are now selling at about 200 naira. And of course, there's a huge margin. We also understand why they will do this. Because simply, when you buy the product at that price and you go to the depot to buy another set of product, the cash that you have, if you sell it at 162, you will not be able to procure new stock.
Right.
This is one component. The second component is greed. People think that it's an opportunity to take advantage of that situation, despite the fact that it has its commercial implications. When we saw this, every depot owner, 1 week before the 28th, slowed down the sale of product into the market, also expecting the same benefits to come on the table. And of course, the other side of it is that, buyers in trucks are also now escalated the volume that they are buying. So everybody is keeping with the hope that this price will shift, and therefore ultimately they can maximize that value. So that shock, in load out that was slowed down, a refusal of marketers to take those products to their fuel stations, that we knew that this will happen, but we need that to be short-lived. And that's why we commenced the engagement with the stakeholders to see what exactly do we do. Are we in the right position to switch to the new pricing environment? And of course, 3 days before that day, we decided to declare that we will not change that ex-depot price in March. And of course, that is what clearly saw the exit of the queues that you are seeing in the town. Those queues, we didn't panic. We are not surprised. We are not shocked, but we knew that it's vanished because there's excessive stock in the fuel stations, in trucks and in tankers and in fuel depots. As a matter of fact, as at the point of that switchover, we have over 2.1 billion liters of PMS in our stock. And most of them are on land. It means that it's in the custody of marketers, it's in the hands of traders and customers. So we knew that this will switch up. We did not take any extraordinary action, as you may have noticed. We didn't go to fuel stations to enforce sale. We didn't bother to go to the depot because we knew that if you don't change the price, everybody would be forced to bring that on the table. So that's exactly what happened.
Labour's argument had always been that we will be faced with this situation when deregulation, which they now agree is the way to go, happens, because we are importing the product and we do not have control over the fundamentals that dictate the international prices because we are not producing locally. We used to, which brings me to the question of how do we do this? Because it's like a catch-22 situation.
Yeah.
When oil prices go up, Nigeria earns more from crude oil sales. But then the local prices for those consuming locally will also go up because we're importing. The refineries, our local refineries, are central to this. I've heard you say in the past that you do not intend to sell those refineries. You intend to rehabilitate them. But we spent so much money in the past on this with very little or no result. Why is this one going to be different?
Yes, not just about, let me step back to explain why expectations are appropriate by the members of the public and the Nigerian community. When you have local refining, for instance, if you're able to meet all your PMS demands, what you would have succeeded in doing is to cut off some component of the cost of petroleum, or PMS to be specific. First, you will have no need for transporting petroleum from, say, Europe or anywhere into the country. That means it takes off a freight element in the cost structure, which comes around 15 naira to the liter, for every liter, maximum 17 naira to the liter. So literally, yes, freight and other taxes that will be associated with transportation from other locations into this country, not just freight. So that element accounts for about 15 to 17 naira maximum. So at any point in time, if you do not refine locally, that component of it is a cost that is that customers or consumers will have to bear. But mind you, even when you refine locally, there's still cost of transportation at the gate of the refineries, which will be around 3 to 4 naira to the liter. So that if you take that off from the $15 15 naira, for instance, that means you are seeing a value of about 12 naira to the liter. So literally everything else around petroleum pricing is anchored on international pricing because you have to buy the crude, refinery parts are international, and not only that, pricing for the petroleum itself and its byproduct are all international. So you don't go to quotation, you don't produce locally and say, I'm going to fix local prices for it, because you have to benchmark it against a global standard because you have to recover your cost. There must be refinery margin. And also the products that you export, because ultimately you have surplus that you have to export, it has to be priced on international price. So all this is clearly controlled by international pricing structure. So the local component will probably 10 to 20% maximum of the value of the PMS that you see in the market. So it's very good to produce locally, but we have exaggerated the impact of local refining as the basis for pricing. What it does, at a very strategic level, is that when you refine locally, the product is very close to you. It covers your national security expectation. You are quick to the market. If you have shortages, you can close that gap very, very quickly. And not only that, because if you have surplus, you can now export so that you can earn foreign exchange. To that extent, absolutely correct. There are pains that this will take away when you refine locally. And therefore, we have a line of sight around this. So therefore, we are focused on two things. First, to make sure that we deliver to the market as we are today at the best price that is possible, which is very true. And I know if you may be aware that against our past, and I don't want to throw tantrums at the past, that's not an issue. It's not really important anymore. But we know that every year against our past practices, we know that we have savings of over $1 billion for every product import that we have done on an annual basis. This is very, very significant. And that is reflecting on the prices that customers or Nigerians are paying for it. And not only that, we made a strategic error. And I've told you, I will be very frank. We made a strategic error around what to do with our refineries. Since 2010, it didn't start today. We thought that you need to go get the original refinery builder to come and do the rehabilitation work for you. That's a strategy failure. That system rolled over until 2016, 2017, trying to make that work. But as you're aware, if you buy a Toyota car, you don't go and ask Toyota to come and service your car for you. You know, there are people whose job is do that, and they are called EPC contractors. So we changed that strategy very lately to do the right thing, because as a matter of fact, one of the original refinery manufacturers told us that they will not put their boots on ground. This is not their job. If you want to do this, they will get somebody to work with us. This is the reality in the business. So what we are doing very, very different today is that we're engaging an EPC contractor mechanism. And then on the top of that, we're going to put an O&M contract. O&M contract means operation and maintenance. We're not going to do ourselves. We know the trust deficit that we have. We know the issues that we have. We know the interferences that have affected our business. And ultimately, you do need to get what others do, which is to get an O&M contractor who has to deliver on your operations at a cost, on a value that is fixed, on a value that is also guaranteed by banks. So that way, nobody loses. And then, of course, NNPC gradually backs out of the operations of that refinery, which brings you to the ownership of the refinery itself. Our considered view is that when we have advised government to do this, and we know that this is being considered, is to go to what we call the NLNG model, where NNPC becomes a minority holder in the asset. We bring in private sector so that they can take equity in this refinery, and then we'll continue to grow that business from that perspective. Since you have now an EPC contractor that will deliver on a world-class basis, you have an O&M contractor, you now have partnership, and we're also going to borrow to deliver this, because when you borrow, it puts pressure on you to deliver, because the payment for the borrowing is based on the performance of the refinery. And therefore, as a matter of necessity, you can no longer afford to do anything different. You cannot afford to shut down the refinery. Your EPC contractor must give you guarantee that this plant will run at 90% capacity for a minimum of up to 5 years. And therefore, you have a structure that will deliver value to the Nigerian people at the end of the day. And I know it's a different story. I'm very convinced that this is the right way to go, because I know also that it takes away power and authority from NNPC, but that's not the problem, because the key thing is to deliver on the value that we have. And I think that's what is different. Going forward, we are seeing beyond NNPC. Today, this country we import everything of the petroleum product that we utilize today. Our refineries we have shut down deliberately for the purposes that are very, very clear. First, we'll conduct our turnaround maintenance, but more importantly, that we will not be able to operate them in their current status optimally. It's cheaper for you to shut it down and pay the salary than continue to operate. Let me explain what this means. When you deliver crude oil from Escravos into Warri all the way to Kaduna, you lose substantial part of that volume. And the refineries, because of the historical challenges that it had, 20 years of challenges or not getting it done right, 20 years of some form of vandalization of the facility itself, it cannot operate at levels below 70% of its installed capacity efficiently. Therefore, when you put $100 crude, for instance, you are going to recover $70 product. And you don't want to do this. You can do it for the optics. Nice, your refinery is running, people will clap for you. But what you will post in your books will be far worse than you are shutting down and continue to work on making sure that it works optimally. Every refinery must operate at about 90% for it to make money. Refinery margins are very, very thin. We know this is not something that you can gamble on and say that, oh, I'm going to do this for the sake of it. Yes, we understand the emotions around this, but ultimately, when you have the combination of what we are doing with our refinery, the other private initiatives, and a number of other initiatives, small initiatives, we are doing what we call the condensate refinery initiative, 2 or 3 of them almost maturing to a final investment decision position. We're engaging our partners and getting partnership, not in the structure that people are aware of, in a structure where NNPC becomes a minority equity holder in the setup. And also to support other initiatives. You'll be surprised that we have interest in the Dangote refinery, not because it's a private sector refinery where it's going to help, but we know that putting that in place will ultimately help this country. It is our duty as the national oil company to support this initiative to make sure it's delivered in terms of providing the feedstock and every other support that is necessary for it to deliver. So when we have this package pulled together, put back your refinery in place, bring in some of the soft, on-the-deck kind of refinery initiative that we have, the small modular refinery and the small condenser refinery, maximum of 50,000 barrels per day, and then you are delivering on the Dangote refinery. There are many other small modular refineries that are going on, and if these initiatives are sustained, and then we're able to deliver on all of them, we'll see that in maximum of 2 years, probably 3 years maximum, to be very, very conservative, you'll see this country becoming a next exporter of petroleum product. Today's story may not look good. Yes, it's very bad that we're importing everything that we're consuming today, but we also know that we're in a pathway that will deliver on this.
That brings me to PIB. Because all of this, plans, projections, and so on, both for you as NNPC and for your partners, appear to be stalled because of the PIB. The PIB is supposed to provide a framework on which people are supposed to be able to say, okay, look, this is what's going to happen. These are the laws governing this and this and that. This is how it's expected to proceed. But for almost 2 decades, that law cannot be passed. It hasn't been passed. Is it a case of those expected to pass it not really understanding what is at stake or understanding the provisions? Because I'm told quite a lot of them are also quite technical in orientation. Or is it still the usual Nigerian factor, politics mixed with a number of other things, vested interests and all of that? Which one is it? And why is it that we can't seem to get over this hurdle of the PIB?
Yes, actually it's older than 20 years. As you may be aware, the current structure of the petroleum legislation in the country, particularly the operations and the fiscal structure, is actually laws that were established in 1967. So there hasn't been any substantial change to our petroleum legislation since 1967. That means you are operating a very, very archaic, old school kind of petroleum system. And for the industry, this industry that banks on certainty, every major upstream contract or every major initiative has a lifespan of at least 20 years. So if you can't see stability of laws and system and processes for 20 years, typically upstream companies will not invest because the recovery period is long. Probably you take back all your costs in 5-6 years, and then your margin over a period of time cannot be realized because as you cross the 5-year schedule, you go into higher operating costs, and therefore it diminishes your returns, increases taxation, and therefore you have far longer period of time for you to become to recover all the value that you're expecting from this business. So what we have experienced in the last 20 years, now narrowing it to the last 20 years, so we introduced some form of uncertainty because knowing fully well that we do need to change our petroleum legislation, there are several attempts even by the military to bring some changes into the petroleum law and fiscal environment. That didn't work out substantially. Some of them actually ended up as complications. But ultimately, there is absolute need to ensure that works. And the end result is that we introduced uncertainty in particularly year 2000. And at that period, if you recall, what is called the Oil and Gas Reform Committee was set up.
Right.
The whole idea was to create a new legislation, review the past, put up a more modern petroleum legislation framework that will make sure progress is achieved, fiscal structure is adjusted so that it becomes more competitive, and also you have a governance structure that will deliver the value of that time. Obviously, that didn't work out until 2008 when the Petroleum Industry Bill finally found its way into the National Assembly. And of course, as you rightly pointed out, it's a very global document. When you consolidate about 16 laws into one, which means that there are pockets and pieces of legislations, some what they call regulations that were made, where we try to pull them together into a single law and pass it as a legislation with amendments that will fit into circumstance of 2008. And obviously, it didn't work because first, we couldn't achieve alignment between the executive and the National Assembly, the two tiers of the National Assembly. A number of our partners were not comfortable with the structure of that law that we are putting in place. A good segment of even the downstream players in the industry did not find those provisions adequate. And ultimately, too many wranglings, no alignment, and ultimately both the government of President Yaradua and that of Goodluck Jonathan could not pass the legislation. So they're all the same issues. We couldn't find alignment, and ultimately those legislations are not passed. And why they're not passed, I think it's very good to respond to this. First, when you have a fiscal structure, it's supposed to be a competitive fiscal structure. Investors always look at what is the alternative to what you're offering me. And of course, as long as there's discordant views around what that represents, that you can never find alignment. And of course, because we also know that this is the largest industry we have in the country, the most sensitive to pricing, the most sensitive to margins. It's a global business. Competition is very high. Governments all over the world are interested in what legislation you put in place. And the amount of pressure that comes from that process, both from the local, from the host communities, from Nigerians in diaspora, business community, from banks. Everybody has a stake in this document. And ultimately, the convolution of those situations made it impossible for governments to pass, including the last one that was sent to Mr. President in the last assembly, which was not accepted because it still has some elements of those difficulties that were not properly resolved. And what Mr. President did very differently is, why don't we just change the whole? So remember that the last one was a National Assembly bill. It wasn't an executive bill. Right. And the executive does need to own that process. Of course, it is the executive that's going to implement it. The industry is run by government and the executive arm of government. So there's a ton of difference between what was in the past and today. So government engaged to establish the current structure of the petroleum industry bill that was sent to the National Assembly, which recognizes the realities of today. We are no longer in 2008. Things have changed. Energy transition issues have become very prominent. Countries relying on oil have declined. People are looking for alternatives to what we are doing today. Oil is found in very, very many locations that ordinarily you will never expect to find oil, including in our country. Nobody thought that we could have over 1 billion barrels of oil even in the Benue Trough. We didn't see that coming, but we knew there's oil, but we didn't see this magnitude. And there are growing potentials that you see across the globe. The end result is that you must be very competitive. People have choice. Otherwise, you end up with coal. I'm sure you know we have coal in this country. Right. Nobody's talking about it. It's there, it's abundant, but you can't touch it. And the same thing may happen to oil in some jurisdiction. Oil will continue to be relevant in the next 30, 40 years, but the best oil that you will find in the market will be the one that is produced most efficiently and the cheapest cost. And that cost structure means that you have to reduce your expectations from the value that you get from it, from taxation to royalties, and even the margins that partners make. Well, that will now determine why people will put their money in your country. Because you must escalate their margins upwards so that they can come back as a destination of choice, including the banks. Remember that banks will not put their money into any upstream business except they see that you can make money to pay them back. Right. The moment you have a constrained fiscal structure that has huge tax responsibility, huge royalty responsibility, and of course a little margin for the partners, they know that their money is not going to come out ultimately, so they won't invest. So this is the structure that we're trying to correct in the current legislation, which we are very comfortable. We're engaging all the stakeholders, including the partner organizations and our partners in the industry. And ultimately, we're going to deliver a fiscal structure that is going to be very, very competitive. But that's what's of interest to international business and international partners, and also international banking institution. But for the country, we have a different interest, which is not distant from what they expect, but it's also a little different. Why is it different? First, government and institutions should create value. That value doesn't have to be creamed up from one point that you expect. For instance, if you're able to create opportunities for people to invest, if you have more investment, it means more work, more jobs will be created. You will be able to recover more pay as you earn taxes from employees. You are going to create a chain of activities to support the industry itself. So as soon as you create activities in the industry, you are creating a chain of activities that are going on. And secondly, we know we're energy deficient. As a country, we have huge gas resources, over 203 trillion scope of gas that is proven, potential of over 600 trillion cubic feet of gas, and we don't want it to end like coal. And the easiest way to engineer our country, not just in terms of providing power to our country, in terms of other energy resources, creating gas-based industries, you do need to focus on gas as a source of transition fuel, also as a source of prosperity. And this is what we are doing. So our laws must encourage that kind of investment, reduce whatever constraints that is there to stop you from doing this, in terms of pricing, in terms of the fiscal structure, the taxation structure, so that people will now put their money into into gas, so that they can be supplied into domestic market, and then it will grow power. It will also grow gas-based industry. A very simple example that we have is in the Ota area. Gas changed the structure of Ota area and also in parts of Lagos State. What did it do? It provided cheap and reliable feedstock, and you will see the growth of industries in those areas. And I'm sure if you make some investigation, you'll find out the development of industrial activities, even in the Lagos area, ended where our gas pipelines ended. So we know that gas is an enabler. It also enables payment of more taxes. Probably they produce more people are employed, and of course they will pay more taxes to the state government and even to the federal government. So we know there's a value chain that can be achieved when you develop your gas sector. And the PIB is now focused on this. How do we make sure that individuals, companies, and institutions are able to invest to recover their costs and also engineer this growth in our industry?
All of this that we've spoken about so far,
yes,
the PIB, the issue of rehabilitation of the refineries and so on. As you were talking, my mind just went to the fact that some unexpected thing could show up, and yet again, we are running around like we did this time last year.
Yes.
COVID-19 showed up and the entire world had to shut down. This was not in anybody's plan. It was not expected. There were no antecedents for us to say, okay, this is what they did the last time it happened, so let's do that. I'm wondering, one, how did COVID-19 affect the oil industry? I've asked some others who are players, and some will tell you, well, the impact was very limited because most of our operations are not around where there are so many people and all of that. But there were others who were perhaps a bit more frank to say, look, it really, take the issue of price of oil for countries that produce and what OPEC and its partners had to do. It triggered a trade war between Saudi Arabia and Russia. That was resolved. But in the meantime, everybody else suffered while that was going on. I'm wondering, how did COVID impact on the Nigerian oil industry? You, the NNPC, is the major player in the industry. So you are the best person, I assume, to ask this question.
Yes, thank you very much. First, I think it would be naive to put any assertion that COVID didn't have impact on the oil and gas industry. First, what did it really do? I think that's the point of interest. When COVID-19 pandemic got to its peak in March last year, the whole world shut down. And of course, it distorted the demand and supply balance. There were excessive production on the table. There's nobody to consume it. And therefore, what it does is that you have too much supply, you have less demand. Ultimately, prices crash of our commodity, particularly of crude oil. I'll come to the gas part of it. That crash resulted in some jurisdiction, they were paying people to come and take crude oil from their terminals. The reason is that it's cheaper for you to allow them to take than keep it, because you have to shut down the wells for you to control that production. And then when you shut down in some reservoirs, you will not be able to come back after the event. And therefore, you are better off paying somebody to take the crude free of charge, give him $1, please come and take out, give you $1, and it happened in Canada, and so that I can sustain production. But for the larger component of the world, of the oil-producing community, it's a massive shock, because you have to deal with it. First, you cannot produce because storages are all full, so you have to stop the production as a matter of technical necessity. Secondly, you don't want to produce and give it out. And therefore, this conversation took place between OPEC and other non-OPEC countries to say, we have to do something, we have to cut this production. Obviously, there's nothing we can do, not just to manage price, but the very reality that there's nowhere to take it to. So that engagement resulted in our participation as a country, because we're a member of the OPEC plus grouping, to agree to do some cuts on our production. And what did it mean to us? For us now, let me just put it in perspective. Today, precisely on the 17th of April, at the peak of that production, because of the initiatives that were in place to ramp up our production to at least 5 billion barrels per day within 2020, that's our target. By 17th of April, precisely last year, our production has hit 2.49 million barrels per day. That didn't happen in 10 years, but that means you also now have to face what COVID-19 has put on the table. So you have to cut down the production. Today, now in perspective, we are producing anywhere between 1.6 and 1.7 million barrels per day. Remember that that will now account for about 700 to 800 million barrels of losses in volume in the market. May not be the price, but in terms of volume, this is what you are losing in the market.
But yet OPEC says we're breaching our quota. Even with what you said now, they say we are breaching our quota.
Yes, there's a distinction between what you can do immediately and what you do over a period of time. We understand this because there's no science around, looking at the whole industry. We're not Saudi Arabia where you have a single manager of all the wells. The Saudi Aramco manages all. It has total control of all the production. But here we are partners. We are not, that's not the same kind of arrangement that we have in this country. Therefore, it's very impossible to say this well do 2,000, do 3,000. Ultimately, at the end of the year, you have an exact number. So sometimes you do have technical constraints that will make it impossible for you to meet that exact quota. I'm sure that you may have seen through the OPEC conversation that in some months we actually underproduced. In some months we did. So put it on balance. Nigeria has completely complied with our obligations to OPEC. Even if you don't, or even when you produce, you will not find buyers because this is the market that we are seeing. There's a shortfall in the market, and of course that shortfall is still not compensated for. The whole market sees this compensation to clear out probably by the end of 2022. That's best estimate. But as you are also aware, new complications of COVID are coming. Some countries are still shutting down. So we don't have a line of sight around when those volumes will come back to the market.
I need to ask you about the issue of transparency because it's something that has seemingly dodged the NNPC down the years. More often than not, when you hear the acronym NNPC, what used to follow it is either fuel scarcity or a lack of transparency, more like corruption. You have taken it upon yourself to be more open with the books in various forms and so on. But we still hear about, NNPC didn't remit this amount, complaints from governors in some instances, the National Assembly in other instances. The one that was most recent for me came from the National Assembly quoting the 2016 audit report that says NNPC did not remit 4 trillion to the Federation account. Of course, I also read part of the response to that from the NNPC. But I have you here, not just specifically about this instance, but can you give an idea of what is responsible for the possibly lack of understanding of the operations of the NNPC that leads people to this conclusion that, 1, you're not transparent, 2, you are spending money you don't have authority to spend?
Thank you very much. First, maybe we haven't done enough to communicate with our shareholders over time in terms of having them access to the informations that are in our custody. I will admit this. And it may come from background of NNPC as a company owned by all of us, saying that, look, you should know this. Why should I talk about it? What is obvious is obvious. Let me come back to this explains the issue around the 4 trillion or so. I haven't seen that report. But if that is so, you see, you cannot eat your cake and have it. It's not possible. When you ask, for instance, as we are doing today, Nigerians and generality of our citizens will expect cheap fuel. I don't have a problem with this. Of course, if it is possible, you do it. But when you sell it below market, you do have a cost. And when you sell below market, this is another name for subsidy. Anything you call it, under recovery, subsidy, or any name we call it, you have a product you bought at $100 and you are selling it at $70. So you have a delta of $30, and somebody has to be at that delta. And it is impossible to expect NNPC to now sell this product at sub-market level and also deliver the full value of the crude oil that is in our possession. It is not possible. So it's simply not possible to do this. So this is most of the conversations around activities that NNPC carried out on behalf of the Federation and the federal government. For instance, if you have a legislation, if appropriation acts, to be very specific, every year the National Assembly passes appropriation provisions of activities NNPC must do on behalf of the Federation. As a first-line charge, some of the activities that no one will do. For instance, when you say lay a gas pipeline infrastructure to a location where there are no consumers, you can do it as a national strategic initiative, and which is part of the things that we are doing. The government will budget for, we will take this gas, for instance, to a location X in this country. Then we will now think of what to do with the gas. So you cannot invest in this and ask NNPC to charge that as a first-line charge to the Federation account and ask that, no, NNPC remit all this money into the Federation account. This is the whole conversation. And this is why we say, look, let's deal with this. And that's why we publish our audited financial statement, 2019 and 2018 and 2019. And I will publish the 2020 financial before the end of June. And that within the provisions of the law. The law says we must do it by June, but I can assure you that we'll do before June. We're almost done with the audit, and everybody will know what we have done, including some of those issues that are being raised in the public space. And what does that do to us? Because your shareholders need to know to be accountable to them. We understand there are certain things that may be of commercial sensitivity, maybe your pricing structure as it progress because your suppliers have not completed supply and all these things. But despite this, I can tell you that there's no company today in the world is doing what we're doing today. No national company is publishing its statement of financials and operational report on monthly basis. But Nigerians don't even go back to take a look at those reports that we are publishing in the media. But it's also our job to make sure that we call their attention to those publications, publish our financial statements, and constantly engage so that they know what we are doing, including the other stakeholders.
I must also ask you about something else that affects a lot of people. Your pipelines. First, there's the issue of vandalism, which is big. Lots of your revenue goes into that, repairing, re-repairing, and all of that. Then on the other hand, you have these pipelines that pass through areas that are now densely populated. It's a different discussion about how they became densely populated because by law, nobody is supposed to build within the right of way. But it does appear as if that information is lost on a lot of people. I was having a conversation a little while ago with quite a number of people because we were having this discussion about the last set of explosions that happened in different parts of Lagos, the Abule Ado thing, the Abule Egba, and so on. There were several of them that we were talking about over time. But one thing seemed to run through all of them. These places are now densely populated. And I remember your visit to Lagos during one of those explosions where you said, these places are not supposed to be built up. Nobody is supposed to be here. That does not mean there can't be accidents. But if nobody is here, then the issue of loss of life may not have a reason at all. What are you doing about that now? Because it seems as if the pressure is off because we're not hearing about that anymore. But there are people still living within yards, in some cases, of NNPC's right-of-way, of pipelines. And they complain that there are no markings to say to them that this place is NNPC pipeline area. They find out after they've moved. Whether that is true or not, I don't really know. But again, I have you here.
Yes.
What is NNPC doing about this? Because in another part of the country, we pray it doesn't happen. It's waiting.
Yes, thank you very much. I think it's a national tragedy that people will abuse all provisions of the law and the realities around the dangers that are imminent when you site your houses either on the right of way of a pipeline or fuel or gas pipeline or even proximate to it. Before you build any pipeline, you have to acquire the right of way. Not just where you lay the pipe, but at least 50 meters both sides of the pipeline. You actually compensate for it, you legislate for it, you gazette it, so it will be public information that is known to state governments, to local governments, and the federal government and security agencies. And those pipeline right-of-way are clearly marked over time. They're not secret. They're known to everybody. But despite this reality that we have, people build on the pipelines, and sometimes even state governments issue them certificate of occupancy on the right of way. And we're engaging certain state governments, I don't want to mention names, to make sure that they take out some of these facility, these assets that they're put on our right of way. There are some are illegal, some are even legal on the pipeline. But the dangers are very inherent. So as you do this, remember that the pipeline network we have are very old. Some of them are to 40 years old. Their lifespan is probably 20, 30 years. We haven't replaced them. But it means with age, they become weaker. And also they become more open to failure, even on their own. But above this, and something I also mentioned in the past, that many of the people citing their houses either proximate to our pipelines or on the pipeline right of way are actually communities of thieves, with due respect.
Communities of thieves.
Yes, communities of thieves. And we have seen that happen severally. People piping product into their homes. And indeed, I'm sure you must have noticed during the Abulegba explosion, we found jerry cans of fuel. Houses that were burnt were not just even houses. To be very specific, Nigeria, we are very religious people, but there's a mosque that has jerry cans of fuel. There's also a church that has jerry cans of fuel. So that means it's really a community activity around stealing that is beyond any explanation. Everybody living around that community is aware that this is happening. People come, siphon our pipeline, they come with trucks to load and leave. But we're not giving up. We engage the government security agencies appropriately. That's why you are seeing the incidences are very, very low. We have taken out most of these structures along our right of way. Communities that are built around stealing, we have taken out most of them. I don't want to mention their names, but they are very specific. The Gogoro Island is gone because it's a community of thieves, and we have taken it out with the help of the military authorities. Yeah. And that is why you are seeing that decline in the incidences around the right of way and also even the level of stealing. Stealing is still going on around our pipeline. We used to lose about 20% of all the production or the supply between Atlas Corp into Mosima and all the way to Ilorin. Now it's gone below 5%, 4 to 5%. So even 5% of 10 million liters a day is a huge volume.
It's a lot.
So we are still engaging. We are taking actions in partnership with the government security agencies, because as you take out the hooligans in one location, they move to another location. You have almost close to 200 kilometers of pipeline. So there's limit to how much you can do. And that's where we're going to the next phase, which is to introduce deeper technology, which is we are replacing the pipelines through a build, operate, and transfer framework, which will enable private sector to lay those pipelines and then do the needful. For instance, where you have to do them, what we call the HDD line, drill them deeper, literally bury them at least 40 meters below ground, where the ordinary hooligans will not be have to access to them.
That will make them more difficult to vandalize.
Or maybe even impossible, because you need a rig to get to a 40-meter pipeline. So they can't move rigs to those locations. They cannot dig to get product out of those locations. So we know this is work in progress. We'll deliver on this. Once that is done, those incidences will go down. The same thing is happening around our crude pipelines. Until we took some initiative to contain losses around Escravos into Ori and Boni into Okrika, we're losing up to 10-15% of all the crude oil that we produce, we deliver on those islands. Those have gone. Yes, we have shut down the refinery, but even before the refinery, we have brought them to extremely very, very limited level of losses. The same thing is happening in our other assets across the Niger Delta region. The numbers are going down, but they have not vanished.
Finally, to wind this down, you've already done your projections, so I'm not going to ask about that. I'm going to talk about the general insecurity, because NNPC is one of the major players in the country, not just in the oil and gas industry, but in the country as a whole. So I'm sure as chief executive, you must worry about what goes on. The general state of security, kidnappings. I know some of your staff were kidnapped in the Chad area. I believe that would be now maybe 2 years or so ago. Geologists who were going for exploration. So that highlighted the fact that you're not immune from this. And in other parts of the country, your engineers are attacked while they're trying to repair pipelines that people have vandalized and so on.
Are you really worried? How worried are you? Maybe that's the question I should ask. How worried are you about the general state of insecurity?
It's very good to put insecurity in context. In this industry, we deal with relativity, past and present, and what can we do into the future. Now, when you talk in relative terms in the oil and gas industry, today, I will say that 5 years ago, we're in a worse situation than we are today in terms of security of our staff and our personnel. I understand the issues in the social cycles around banditry, kidnapping that is ongoing of a scale that is now of concern to all of us. But for the oil and gas industry, in terms of relative security of our assets and our facilities, today we're better off than 5 years ago. Now, what changed to bring us to this level of relative safety is that there are interventions that government has done in the last 5 years that didn't happen in the past. There are engagements with communities that was done. I don't want to come into detail, maybe not for this platform, that didn't happen in the past. And also, there are actions that were taken by both the NMPs and our partners that we are not doing in the past. I don't want to also talk about the details around the cumulative effect.
Well, all of this is security,
yes.
so
the
viewers will understand.
They understand this. So the overall impact is having a much more clement business environment in terms of security in the oil and gas sector that we had 5 years ago. So we're very, very happy about this. Were there new challenges to this? Absolutely, yes. Of course, we are not immune from the kidnappings and acts of banditry. That we have families, we have staff members that move around. They are impacted in some locations, but they are all, to us, they are all isolated, and some form of concerted intervention will cure this. I know that expectations are very high in our country, and of course, because we are very easy to forget. Mind you, my brother, in this country, we have forgotten when you leave your house in the morning, you are not sure you'll get to your workplace. 5 years ago, we know this, about 6 years ago. We know this is very true. We don't go to mosques. We have stopped going to churches. And not only that, we're also not able to go to our villages. For instance, I'm from Maiduguri, Borno State. I've spent 2 years running consecutively. I didn't go to see all members of my family. This is not there. I just came back from Maiduguri. My child got married. A number of people visited that. So you can see there's relativity of safety that is on ground, but may not have reached the level that we will think it is possible. And I know that things are being done to make sure that we advance to that level. And therefore, when we take this issue of security out of context, we miss the point, but I also know that, we need to act on it. For us in the industry, this industry is never tired of intervention to making sure that our businesses work. And that is why I mentioned you that there are a number of strategic interventions we are doing with the government security, and that we're getting all the help from the military institutions, Department of State Security Service, the civil defense, and also our own private initiative to align all this so that ultimately safety of our workers is restored. In the process, as you do this, you're also extending that safety into generality of the people. And we are engaged. We are a national oil company, this company owned by all of us. What we do will affect everybody, and therefore we're also engaging in any other framework that will ensure safety of all our citizens. I hope this answers your question.
It does. It does. GFD, thank you very much for your time.
Yeah.
It's been a pleasure speaking with you.
Thank you very much also. Okay, I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
That's today's episode of Newsnight. Thanks for watching. Would like to know what you think of the issues raised during this conversation. Our social media handles through which you can get in touch are right there on your screen. You can also listen to this and previous episodes of the program via our podcast. Visit our website, channelstv.com, and go to podcast. I'm Ladi Akiriduluale. Goodbye.